Hello, welcome back to Off Picture Discussions. My name is John Capone. Today I'm joined by Spyder Dobrofsky, who returns to Off Picture Discussions to talk about his new film, Down Below. It's a psychological horror film. It's on transactional streaming today, October 1st. And I really wanted to have him back on to talk about what it was like to make this on a minimal budget, a crazy schedule, and a very experimental style with exploring the narrative as he produced it, and also what it was like to market and distribute this film with gravitas. So I hope you enjoy this discussion, and thank you as always for watching. And Lucas says hi. Say hi. All right, Spyder Dobrofsky is back on Off Picture Discussions. It's good to have you back, buddy. I wanted to do this because on this day, if it all lines up and works out, your film Down Below is released and out in the world, and people can go and watch it. I believe on Apple TV, on Prime Video. Is there anywhere else they could see it?
Yeah, actually, so it's basically on demand anywhere in North America. That includes places even like Fandango, YouTube. If you have it like on TV without that kind of stuff, like Spectrum, Infinity, um,
Beautiful.
Comcast, all of the. You can basically you're going to be able to find it somewhere to rent. Yeah, October 1st. So by the time this thing is live.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, first of all, I've seen the film. You were kind enough to share a cut of the film with me, and Giovanna and I watched it one night, and we just were completely grabbed by it. It's super immersive, which I feel like is such a big compliment these days because there's so many films that are dumped on streaming services that are feel like they're just sort of checking boxes, right? And people watch it, maybe they have it on in the background. People watch it for certain reasons, but it's really rare to find, a wild animal like your film that is just so unique. It's unique and original, but it's very grounded in, obviously the genre and also the history of filmmaking. You really feel like this film is connected to the horror genre and riffs beautifully on stuff that's come before. I know we talked. I think the last time we talked on here about some of your influences and what the writing process was like. But if I guess starting from this point of like now being done and going through the emotions of it being out in the world, it's this big closure moment, right? Like maybe just tell us a little bit about how it feels, just emotion.
Yeah. It's and thank you for all you said, John. And it is interesting because like I knew when I was writing the script that I was like, well, this I want to make a film that like you are constantly kind of like trying to figure it out as you go, and it basically doesn't allow you to put it on in the background. Like if you put it on in the background, you're going to be lost. In the same way that when I go to see movies, my favorite films are the ones that kind of reward you for like
Mm,
paying close attention and seeing things and like trying to solve it in a kind of mystery way, but also in like all right, there's a level of interpretation that you're going to have to make, but not without closure, but interpretation nonetheless. It's what I loved so much about David Lynch's films and Darren Aronofsky, and even going back to like Tarkovsky and Solaris. Like you have these great, amazing scenes, and even I think Kubrick did it very well. You've got like the Shining Grady in the bathroom with Jack Nicholson. It's like you don't really know what they're talking about, and you're not really sure how all of a sudden Jack Nicholson is suddenly talking to the ghost of this, of the last caretaker, and also like he's seemingly not aware that he's like kind of losing his mind. He's like
yeah,
talking to the guy kind of casually, and it's just like the film doesn't have this expositional moment where it's like, "Hey, Jack Nicholson is possessed right now, and this is a hallucination." It's just like all of a sudden he's in that moment and he's not aware, and we're kind of like going through that trance of the film.
yeah.
uh, I personally love those kind of movies because you can just keep watching them over and over, and even you and I rewatch The Shining. It's just like you see new stuff every time, and you kind of um, take your own taste and ideas and like put it into every watch. So that's what I tried to do. And then as we finish, get ready to release, yeah, man, it's just crazy. There's nerves, there's excitement, there's relief, there's
Yeah.
curiosity mostly. I feel where I'm just like really excited to see what people think, um, and to see if what I tried so hard to do and spent so much time from pre to post, with sound and everything. These little ideas come across, and how do you get across these themes and these kind of heavy subjects without like slamming them into people? Because I'm not a big fan of the movies that are very like preachy and like I want the film to be fun, but there's a lot of other things as well.
Yeah.
And
And I think you did a really good, you brought up Kubrick, who's obviously a big influence on you
yeah,
and I would say me as well in
of course.
certain ways. And what he does really well, I think, is like you mentioned, allows the viewer to have their own experience with the film, right? Like you feel
Mhm.
like you're watching something that's truly an objective set of events that's happening. There's no obviously, Kubrick does he's this master because he is so stylized, but it never feels like while you're watching one of his films that you're watching a particular style. Like he's
Mhm.
nodding to you, hinting at you on certain tropes, certain ways of shooting. It all feels like it's organic to the story that's unfolding. And I think what you did was, you allowed us to go on a ride that is, it's a style, like it's definitely in the
Yeah,
horror genre, and you have those, and that's what's very important about tropes and conventions is they're
yeah,
little footholds for us as an audience to feel oriented. We know what type of story we're in.
orient.
But you took it to
So,
places. And I remember talking to you about this, and I was really interested once I watched the film to dive into what you were talking about. But you were saying how the writing process for Down Below evolved as you were shooting it, right? Like you had a script, and just with the nature of production, obviously it was a shoestring production. You guys
yeah,
were, you know, with
it
each
was.
new week happening, you were recalibrating how you were going to shoot this thing depending on the resources you had, the availability you had from actors and
Yep.
locations. What was it really like? I mean, maybe talk about that in terms of how the writing translated through production, and then later on, once you were through this sort of epic
Yeah,
production,
yeah.
what was it like in the editing booth trying to like rein things back into a narrative?
It is crazy too because we like in the scheme of things, we basically shot like maybe 60 days. Like we had a big amount of shooting days, but it was spread out over like several years.
Right,
Um,
right.
which gave us the ability to tell quite an expansive story that attempts to do a lot, but the downside is that the story, I'm living with it for so long that I'm seeing better ideas blossom, and I'm like, gosh, and like honestly, I think one of the best story beats in the plot twist in the big like core of the film came like we had shot 70% of the film, and I cast this great actor Greg Creek, and he's got this great part in the Rebel Moon movie, and he read the scene, and I just was like, this is the best thing ever. Like his tape was so good. I was like, oh my god, like I couldn't figure out this like villain character, and he brought it to life. But then I was like, all right, you have the part. And then we're getting ready to shoot, and like 6 days before shooting, I was like, dude, I'm so sorry. I'm gonna be rewriting your entire part. And I'm like, trust me, it's gonna be great. Like the gist of it's there. The gist of the but I'm like, I came up with this thing and it explains the beginning, and it was like one of these like weird epiphanies, but I was having these like massive, massive changes, keeping all the like building block ingredients of stuff I'd already shot, where I was like,
Mm,
this has to go in, and then coming up with new stuff that would still tie that in. And
yeah,
so
yeah.
um, it's funny. I've only heard of like David Lynch talking about it with Mulholland Drive, where he's like, I didn't have the movie at all, and then I basically came up with this entire shift that required me to go back, reshoot scenes, reshoot little moments, and I did that. And I basically went through the film, and I figured out what the film was at the
Mm,
very final end of production.
hmm,
And it was
hmm.
like literally rewriting this entire scene, and then going and shooting these sequences. that was really the film I was trying to make all along, but I just couldn't see it. That's
Mm,
what the weird part. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna stay open to this. I'm like, this is so good. I remember like I had a chill down my spine when I like came up with what the film was really about. And it was already somehow threaded through there. And I have to also
mm,
give some credit to my mom. I had shown her a cut and she was like she saw it. She was like she saw the pattern. She's like, this is the movie right here. Like,
mm.
and I was like, wait, what do you mean? That doesn't make any sense. And then she's like, no, da 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 da. She's like, you would just need to reshoot this, add this, cut these scenes. It like created this weird like live organism, but it
Yeah,
shifted the organism into this movie that is the most cohesive version of the film.
right.
And I it's almost like from the get-go I'm like, how did I not see that? And I was like, well, I was putting that stuff in, but it morphed right at the end into something that made sense of everything that I had added all along, that in some way was like kind of random. Like I had these random scenes, they weren't random, but they were overly thematic, and this turned them into this like cohesive. It's crazy, man. It's
Yeah, that I mean that's really unique too. I
kind
mean
of get what I'm
nowadays
saying.
because
Yeah,
it's like again, and this is to the benefit of not having, traditional financing, right?
yeah,
Because
yeah,
you're not submitted to, investors or a studio with a
yeah,
deadline or an interest in seeing a timeline of return or anything. It's like you're able to go out and execute, then take a step back, put a cut together, look at it yourself, have other people look at it, and just have that breathing room for the
yeah.
organism to find its orientation, right? So do you think
Mhm.
it was just that screening with your mother, or was it also, maybe there was like the way you talk to an actor or exploring something with an actor or
Yeah.
just the energy on set? What really was it that kind of like
She
inspired that sort of like aha, that
she
insight?
my mom noticed, and my mom's a great talented writer. I mean, she and my dad taught me how to write, but it's interesting when you're making films like they didn't really read the script. They're just like, show us the a cut or whatever. Like,
Right.
and for 2.5 years, I was like, I don't have anything to show you other than like a daily or whatever. Um, but every single actor I brought in, and then every set I went to where I was trying to get these like real stuff, where I was like, oh my god, this is even better than I wrote, kept taking me off script over and over again. If that makes sense, because
Yeah.
and I would be like, instead of just like, it's not like taking off script like an ad lib. I mean, like we got there and it was like, like I'm gonna give this character this thing that like doesn't make any sense, but I'm like, it just feels better here. Let's do that, and I'll figure it out later. And then I just kept doing these things, and I'm like, let's really focus on this part of the scene. Like, screw these last 12 lines. Don't care about them. I want to end the scene on this beat. I want to get rid of this backstory. And I would do all these things on the spot, but it was basically changing my script constantly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it all of a sudden, when I was in post, I realized that I had, and all the best stuff was things that were live,
Mm.
and the other stuff, but there was a connective issue problem, because there was a blueprint, and then there was me leaving the blueprint with these actors, these great talented actors. You get Eric Roberts, Doug Jones, or you Bai Ling, and they do something, and I'm like, instead of me just being like, I'm just going to force them on script, I'm like, they're bringing this other thing to the character that, I got to be honest, is more interesting than anything I came up with. And instead of my
Right. Right.
ego being thing, I'm like, this is fucking better than what I was going to do. So
Hmm.
let's make the whole scene around this thing they added, and let's
Yeah.
add this and this. And then it was like, I just kept doing that with every scene. And all of a sudden, I was in post with a film, kind of like Apocalypse Now, where I was like, well, this doesn't even resemble the script anymore. Even though it does, it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so all of a sudden, I'm like looking at it in post, and then I'm cutting it. And that's where this big idea came through. And I was like, oh my gosh, I thought I was making a film about this. But really, all these little things that I kept getting, like, so when I would go freehand and just kind of trust these actors on these things, I was kind of tapping into the same idea over and over again. That idea became the movie.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
No, I understand. It is clear. It's like you were, which I think is the job of the director. It's like writer directors, I think sometimes can get kind of like lost in the sauce because as the director, you're too much in your writer brain, or as a
Yeah.
writer you're too much in your director brain, right? So you can
Yeah.
kind of get lost in translation there. But I think the job of a great director is to really listen to what the story wants to be, and you start with the script, and then you start, if you have a rehearsal process, and maybe you're shooting while you have a rehearsal process, which kind of sounds like what this was. It's like you were experimenting, you were going out and producing your film, but again had the bandwidth and the space to really experiment. And when you're allowed to do that, you get to listen. You really get to listen and feel out, what does this film want to be, and then you got to trust you put the right ensemble of actors, of people inhabiting these roles together to really try things. And I think when something's meant to be, like this film was meant to be, they're somehow synced up, right? Even though they're trying their own things and its specificity, it somehow is linked through this creative energy that
There was
you're
a link.
guiding,
Yeah.
right?
There was
So,
a total link, and in a weird way, it's like I hear actually one of the actors on the film, David Steen, who plays the like Mr. Monday, the evil preacher. He has worked with Tarantino 3 times, and so he always tells me stories about Quentin Tarantino. And he said like he gets the luxury of shooting basically films that become 4 hours, and then he can see how every single idea comes to life in film form, not just writing form, and then he cuts it down. And in a
yeah,
weird way, I kind of got to do that by shooting for so long. I could have had a 2 hour and 45 minute cut of this film.
yeah, yeah,
The film is now 90 minutes, and it's 90 minutes not because I'm like, oh, I need to get it down for an audience or anything. I'm like, because that was the movie that worked, and the rest of the stuff, like there's bits and pieces and magics from those scenes that didn't end up in it, but there's still parts of those scenes in the film. But it's like I got to then rewrite the film yet again in post,
yeah, yeah,
which is I think what's when someone shoots a 4 hour film and then they turn it into 2.5 hour Django Unchained, he's rewriting the film in post. He's not
yeah.
just like shaving the scenes down and getting rid of establishing shots. He's like cutting characters, cutting storylines, cutting C plots, cutting this parts of characters. And so you're cutting it in like film. So you're like all the scenes have been edited together, everything was like my blueprint was brought to life. I shot every single sentence of the screenplay. It's
Hmm.
just that when I laid it all down, it didn't work the same way that the screenplay worked.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's incredible. I mean, it makes me think of another question about the producibility of a process like this, right? Because it's like you have this sort of great creative experiment, this creative quest you're on, and that's all story and idea driven, right? Experimenting with ideas,
Yeah.
watching how actors are behaving in front of the camera, and really being open, super open to that.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe talk about this whole other thing, which is the technicality of filmmaking, right? The
Mm.
establishing a consistent style visually,
Yeah.
making sure that, yeah, your lens choice is consistent. Your framing, some of your angles it lives within the same language, within the same world. I mean, what was that like? Because, I'll be honest, this looked, the most specific and cohesive of anything of yours I've ever watched.
Yeah.
And it was like such a jump toward
Yeah.
something that was its own, very original
Yeah.
idea, right?
Yeah.
Just visually, not
Visually,
even
yeah.
just the storytelling
Yeah,
of
yeah,
it,
technically
visually.
visually, yeah. Well,
And
that's
so
so
maybe talk about. I know Dash was
that
was
shot it.
camera opping a lot, cinematographer. I
He
mean,
shot it.
I was super impressed with what you were able to do, because typically, when we talk about something like this, it's like, okay, someone has a DV camcorder and
Yeah.
is just hell bent on telling their story, and they do it
Yeah.
over years and
Yeah.
stops and starts, all that stuff. But you did it on a Panasonic, cinema
EVO.
camera.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So
It was
that was
lit really well. The
yeah.
framing was very intentional. Like, just talk about what your dialogue and
Yeah.
shorthand with Dash was like, to be able to yield that result amid, this sort of crazy,
Crazy wild
stop and
production.
start production process. Yeah.
Yeah, production where like there were things where we were on like insane time crunches and shooting at churches and stuff, and it was like I need to get this, but how do we also keep this like cohesive in one style, but a style that fits this film? I have to give kudos to my brother because he actually, and it was one of the things that I told him. I was like, look, as a DP, we need to find one cohesive look for this film. And we can't just have this scene looks like it's from an indie drama. This scene looks like it's
Right.
from a sitcom. This one looks like it's a Christopher Nolan. It's like we need a cohesive palette, and the palette should still have all these feelings and colors and looks and shots and type of things. But it's like I don't want a movie where it's like everything is like dollying in, then it's like we're not trying to make like a procedural thing, but we're trying to make a style that fits all around, and we can't have shots in the movie that just don't feel like they're part of this movie.
Yeah.
I think the first big thing we did is we chose the Panasonic EVA1. I was like, look, we're going to be doing a lot of running and gunning, and we're going to be in time crunches on some of these sets. If I want to get the locations that I really want on the budget I have, I actually need to shoot stuff quicker, and then I can do way crazier things than I would be able to, because if I need the full blown, full schedule and these locations and stuff and permits are it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
So the Panasonic, I actually was looking at videos and I was like, this camera is getting called a documentary camera, but for whatever reason, right? You can go into Reddit and everything, and people just love to they love to hype up one thing and then they love to hate on it. And I found that there was a lot of hate for Panasonic, which is funny because Panasonic's film, they were actually one of the early people in doing film and not being done for they were
Right.
we're hardcore film, and our shit is complex. And so we liked this camera because it was very complex, and it had this vlog that actually told people that if you're not prepared to do extensive color grading, including denoising the footage, this is not the camera for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so all the hate I found online were people like, oh, my stuff looks so flat and noisy when I try to put my LUTs on it. It's like, yeah, because you need to denoise it, then put a LUT on. Yeah. And most of these cameras they still have some sort of auto denoiser. This one doesn't. And so my brother and I we were a little nervous because we were like, shit, I hope we're not shooting this whole movie and we can't denoise it probably. But at the same time, Panasonic, I called them. They promised me that. They also found me this camera at a store that it was I was a one that was in there for showing purposes, and so they gave me an insane deal on it. I wrote them an email. I was like, dude, I'm trying to make a film, and then it was going to be the lens, and I was like, we need to find that focal length that we could shoot majority of this film so it just feels like it's style. And then I have this long lens camera that I want to use to kind of make a stalkery feeling.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'd like to try to make most of this film work here because I think that it will have a cohesiveness. And we sat in this room and watched with the Panasonic, the Canon prime lens. We looked at all the prime lenses, and we ended up going for this weird one, and it was the bokeh on it, and which is the little lens flare. I just was like, yeah. With this and the Panasonic, I feel like we're shooting a movie. We're literally everything I filmed looks like it was shot in the 90s. It just looks that way. It has a little bit of this there's something about it, and I was like, I've not seen this, and I don't want us to be trying to compete with the top of the line stuff. I want us to have our own style.
Yeah, that's
nothing
great.
Like anyone's. If we try to compete, we're just going to feel insecure and we're going to fall. We're not going to compete with shooting on an Arri Alexa with these nice lenses where they have these giant crews and these things. We need to find a camera that has a personality. And so this kit we got was the ultimate personality. And I think that was my first strong point. And then it was Dash had his own style that was I'd be like, hey, let's do this. And we would get into fights a lot, actually, because he's like, I don't like this. And that fight would always create this friction that would end up making the style of the film.
Yeah.
And I was like,
it's where it happens, man. That's where the best stuff happens, in that creative collision.
Yeah. And that's awesome. I only shot a little bit of some B camera action stuff where we needed a second camera, where I was like, I'll run. And then we rented a Sony, another weird. Dude, I just tried to find all these cameras are very high quality, but I wanted to find them that had a little bit of weird character to it.
Yeah, and it did. It totally did. I didn't even. I didn't even think about, I guess, the lens, or if you went with like a traditional prime lens or anything. I
Yeah,
really liked how your use of long lens was, because it really lent itself to this sort of deeply psychological
yeah,
portrait of someone who's, maybe lost his grip on reality, and that
yeah,
that
yeah,
you know
yeah,
that
yeah.
classic blend of horror and psychological horror. But it looked super unique. I think the Panasonic performed really well with
It
whatever
was
lens you
perfect for
chose.
this. It's so funny because I feel like with each project, you basically have to discover your film language, and then it gets
Yeah,
really easy. It becomes very effortless.
right.
But
Yeah,
the
it's
first
just
time,
setting the rule set. Once you have your rule set, you're like, all
oh,
right, we're
rule
gonna go
set,
crazy within that, but we know we have this frame around us that we're gonna work within. So
and it
yeah, it
was
was super successful.
my one of my rule sets too. I was like, I'm gonna allow this movie to be handheld. I'm not
Yeah,
going to add this steady cam thing in because to me it's a bringing in the incredible high production value of a Steadicam is something that I also feel like you then have to continue to achieve over and over and over and over and over again, which makes your production incredibly visual filmmaking oriented. And if you have the big budget for it, go for it. But if you're, I'm like, I need to mostly focus on the soul of these characters and the intimacy. And so in a way, while who doesn't like a Steadicam, I've used it here and there. It's like it was the wrong aesthetic to bring into this thing. And there was a time and place where I have a couple of specific scenes that I needed to have this more smooth and fantastical feeling. And that's where I brought the dolly, like a dolly in. But I was like, there's something to be said, like handheld when you do it in a way that's not like, you're shaking, like, but that it can be done in a way. And I think it can give you this kind of like liveliness.
yeah,
Um, without it being like I don't like handheld when I feel that it's like you can feel the operator behind it.
yeah,
But I
yeah,
do like handheld when I feel that it's like somewhat aesthetic and somewhat done in order to get you a little bit closer to these characters and say like, hey, like we're gonna not treat these people in quite a three-dimensional film world and we're gonna be a little bit closer, a little bit more in your face, a little bit more that kind of feeling while still being cinematic and having good lighting and film makeup and not having that kind of stuff, but just pushing these things for each story. So for another movie, I would everything I did on this movie I would not do in another movie. I felt that it just worked for this film specifically, and I think that's the power of finding your own film language for each story.
yeah. Totally. I mean, I think but it's it showed, it clearly showed, and that's what I wanted to comment on is however sort of elongated or experimental the process of making it was, it felt like a very intentional, very deliberately designed um, journey. Really, I
Mhm.
mean, it's like the storytelling, the writing, obviously, but just the filmmaking. I was really impressed. I don't think a lot of people can do what you did, can pull it off. I mean, you have to be so disciplined and so close to, even when you are experimenting,
Yep.
being aware of what that thread is, at least it not even just a narrative thread, but what you're going for in terms of a tone and an experience for an audience. And I think you clearly had that in mind, even if the story meandered or you were
Yeah.
exploring certain facets of it. You clearly kept in mind, like, I want to make this type of film for
Yeah.
an audience. I want an audience to feel this type of experience, and that really came through. That's where the cohesion
The cohesion, yeah.
happened.
Yeah,
You
I've
know,
always been interested in visual filmmaking, and I still, I love going to see, Christopher Nolan. Interstellar is one of my favorite films, and there is something about like that stuff that I want to be in this film, and I know what shots and scenes I'm like, all right, this scene is gonna be more epic. I need to make this scene more epic, and not just because, but because this is the big climactic thing or whatever. And so those were areas where I would spend more time, and Dash and I would, with our limited production and crew, the way we did this stuff is that we basically went out to production, like this place called the props hand prop store, and we would spend hours looking for props. We would spend looking for little things, and then like if we found this incredible statue, we would light it and we'd figure out like how do we make this a character. And we spent a lot of time on inserts and things, and the freedom of our schedule allowed us to, if we were willing to put that attention to detail, which we did, it was a maddening attention to detail, but that's kind of filmmaking in general. But
Yeah.
normally when you have a bigger production, you have all these people helping you, and a lot of on these little productions, sometimes people just skip it because they're like, we just can't do it. And my brother and I were like, well, let's do it. Let's just be
Yeah.
those crazy guys who literally spend 7 hours before everyone gets there, pre-lighting the set, hanging up lights and hanging up, chains in our basement dungeon scene and doing all this stuff and creating fake blood on the wall. We like that stuff. We have a meter of what looks good, and the only thing that would stop us is not wanting to put in the man hours to actually
Right. Right.
build these sets and build and add these things.
Right.
Um,
No, it's absolutely true. And, to your point, it's like you'd have departments on a bigger film.
yeah,
You would have departments who that's their only job is to
it's
focus
their
on
own
that
job.
stuff,
Yeah,
right? Whether it's a prop master, even like right down to like a buyer, someone who goes out and buys
yeah,
props or rents props and buys clothing and stuff. And then that's not even to mention the whole production design department who's really supervising all of that. So that, I mean, that's like
we did all of
tens,
that. We did
sometimes
all of that
hundreds
stuff.
of people.
Yeah,
And like
yeah,
you said, it's like the only way you could do it with a micro crew, just really just you and Dash, and then people you would bring on for the day or the week or
yeah. We
whatever.
had great
It's like
people and friends. Yeah,
you
yeah.
need
That
the time. You need the time to be able to
it's
do that,
time,
and
and
you had the time.
you
Yeah,
need the passion still. And I think we were so passionate about the story and film that when we went to these prop house places, when we looked around. We really, really looked around. We weren't like, let's just check off the list. We were trying to make creative decisions by going there.
yeah,
And there was a lot of driving and us picking up, dropping off, picking up. We must have went and picked up and dropped off there 25 times.
yeah,
And it's like 5 miles, 8 miles from us, something like that. But we were just like, hey, we're shooting a scene tomorrow, and it's going to be in this basement, or at this church underground, room. The room has a lot of great stuff, but is there some extra stuff we can find? And so we would go, and of course, we always found stuff, and we were like laughing, like this is so good, like this, and that I think that you need a serious amount of passion to
yeah,
make a movie, and it's a passion not to be making movies, but passion about that story, and whether you have the luxury of getting a several $1 million budget and doing it in a streamlined 15 days or 20 days, or if you have to make yours over a couple of years, you still need the passion. And if you have more crew, you're still trying to translate that passion to those people and
yeah.
get them excited about your story and make it their story too. So they're like, oh, this is my story as well. And everyone who worked on the film, I was like, look, like I'm bringing you here because you have skills and ideas. I'm not here to be, a dictator and tell you. I'm like, I want you to bring as much as you can, and my only job is to see if I can take all these great ideas you have and then put them into this salad
Right.
where the salad still tastes good and doesn't. It's not like someone's adding ketchup to the salad. Like even though their ketchup tastes really good, it's like, hey, we have to make sure this fits in this,
Yeah.
but let's still make it yours. And that's post sound. I had an amazing team, and this guy Jared who helped me on my last film. These guys, it was like they watched the film and they're like, they were expecting me to be like, so what the hell is this film about? I see all these great things. And I was like, okay, what did you think it was about? And like, well, this. I'm like, yes, I want to bring some of that in as well. Like, I want to make the sound and the sound design and the experience as inviting as possible. And I'm not glued into this. I have a couple of things I think need to be the forefront, but how can I bring what you're so good at into the project instead of me like just basically using you as a computer mouse,
Right, totally. I mean, that's the mark of a great director, someone who's willing to listen and tune into what the project needs, what the story needs at every step along the way. Listen, I only have a few more minutes, but before we go, my final question is maybe tell us a little bit about, so you have this thing done, right? And
Mhm.
you did the very smart thing, obviously with, years and over a decade of experience in the film industry now, of knowing what pieces you need in place to get a film out there that is seen,
Yeah.
that that competes, like you said, that is viable commercially as well as artistically. And you did that up front, casting,
Casting.
at least like 4 or 5 names that
Yeah.
you could put in the description of Apple TV or on Prime, and people know who they are. It's gonna draw them into the film, right? But just talk a little bit about what it was like finishing the film and then getting into these discussions with distributors
Yeah.
for the marketing and distribution of this
Totally.
film.
I know.
And I just want to compliment, before you jump in on the question, I just want to compliment you on both your poster and your trailer. I mean, it's really top notch. I think it's the best representation of the film that it
Thank you.
could be for those two assets, and you nailed it. So yeah, just tell us a little bit about what
Totally.
that
Yeah.
was like.
Yeah. And it's funny because if, I always felt that I wanted my films to do well. I made many films. This is my first film that's getting distribution. But I've made a lot of short films that I submitted to festivals. I made a complete no budget feature, submitted to festivals, and I really never had any luck. So I always was like, maybe I need to think a little bit harder on the business side of making a movie. And I don't mean like, oh, just what do you do after your film's done, but actually how can you make your film as your creative, your little masterpiece, but also how can you make it something that's out there, that could be marketed, that could be consumed, that people could actually share. It's one of those things that I didn't want to think about. And then on this one, I was like, let's really try to make a movie that will get distribution, will get seen, because the story is worth it. But if you make a great story and it doesn't have elements that are marketable,
Mm.
it's just, I don't know. I don't want to say it's impossible, but you're going against the current. The movie stars exist for a reason. People like to go see them. That's it. When we got Eric Roberts and Bai Ling and Alexis Knapp, I always call her Knapp. I was making so many jokes about like her name, like, hey, it's
Yeah,
Knapp.
she was great. The women in the film were incredible. I mean,
Yeah,
the men were too, but the women, Alexis Knapp and
yeah,
Bai Ling, Bai
yeah.
Ling was
Bai
it
Ling
was so unique of a role and a
is
performance.
so, yeah. But I learned, the reason these people make your movie do well is that people want to see them. It's not that you get this movie star and it's like, oh, you have a movie star. It's that they actually make your content better. They are some of the best people in the world at what they do. That's why they're movie stars. People around the world have declared that they like watching them. That's the real magic of these people, is that they're talented, they're gifted, and that they have an on-screen presence that is exciting. And so when you get, Alexis has been in, one of the big actors in 3 Pitch Perfect movies. That these movies have grossed billions of dollars. And Eric Roberts, it's like people like seeing these people for a reason. There's just some sort of quality about them. So getting them in the film gave us a lot of buzz as well, just from Deadline and Variety. But it was all going to come down to, can I make them great? Can I show a different side of them? And can I make them fit into my movie? And then when I finish this film, will the film excite a distributor? And that's, at the end of the day, like, we got turned down from some sales reps, And so when when they watched the film and they loved it and they wanted to, be a part of getting our film out there, I was like, oh my gosh, like I watch a bunch of movies, and B, like, they got it. They understood what we were trying to do, and they
Mm-hmm.
understood how we use these actors, which is like, this is an Eric Roberts that many people I don't think have seen. This is a really dark, Alexis has done a lot of studio style stuff. This is a very dark, dramatic performance from her. And
Yeah,
Bai
for
Ling
sure.
is just totally the most maniacal, wicked, I don't recall her, doing those kind of, villainous roles. And then I actually have Doug Jones in the film, who's known mostly for being monsters, and he's playing a human in this. And
Yeah, yeah,
he's so
really interesting
funny.
role. Very,
And,
very
and,
interesting performance.
and Dougie and I met, and we were like, he was like, I want to do this because it's so different and it's fun and it's interesting. And he brought so much to this character that I was like, it was one of the only days where I was like laughing on set, or I was like, damn it, like I'm ruining good takes. Like, I'm like, I'm going to walk away.
Yeah,
But getting these
great.
elements is an important part of being a filmmaker. And it doesn't mean that if you can't get any good actors that are names in your film, it's all hope is lost. It's that you then need to look elsewhere. So if you can't get it with the name talent, make a genre, go into horror, right? I also did that. And then I also think that a title is really important. You need a title that feels like a movie.
Yeah.
I think this was by far the best title I've ever had for one of my films that I directed, and I think that that has helped a lot.
Great.
And Dash came up with the title. I had a different title, and one day he's like, "What if it was just down below?" I'm like, "Ding!" You know,
Simple.
that's explains this movie.
Simple and powerful, you
Simple
know,
and powerful. And
for
so,
sure.
I think that it's really important for filmmakers to incorporate how to make your movie marketable and make your movie a part of it, because this is the movie business. And I think that the worst thing that can happen to filmmakers, I know it for me, the most disheartening thing is when you're just getting silence and you feel like you're in a vacuum and you feel like your art's not getting seen. It's
Right.
worse
Right.
than working on, I dream now of working and directing Sci-Fi Channel movies. The idea of working and being a working filmmaker is like the best thing in the world. And so if you can find a way to make your great artistic pieces where you're doing something and saying something, but still, can you get them out? Can you get them distribution? It's not so easy. And if you can get them, then I think that you're actually on your way in a way that's better than just dying hard on the artistic sword.
Right.
Because
Well, I
make
think you did that with this film. I
yeah,
think
and I
you
tried
you
to.
put a lot of um, a lot of thinking into, constantly being aware and checked in on the story, but also how the story was going to be positioned as a film in the current marketplace.
Yeah.
What's appealing about it? What's original and exciting about it? All those
Mhm.
elements came together. I thought it's super successful just as a watch for someone who happens to watch it, stumbles upon it. But I
Yeah.
wish you, the best of success
Thank
as
you
it
so
goes
much,
out.
man. Thank you, bro.
And yeah, you should be very proud of yourself in this one, buddy.
I
I'm
am.
proud of you.
Thank you, my friend. You've been around, we've been buddies and talking film for a long time. And, well, it just shows you like the passion's there. You're gonna
Where
see,
there's a will, there's a way. You're
yeah,
gonna figure out. You're gonna stay at the Rubik's cube and
you
just
stay
like
at the Rubik's
figure
Cube.
out what works, what doesn't, and forge your way forward.
Yeah.
Right?
And you do, and you realize that like you sometimes your great ideas have always been great, but you may not have successfully translated them
Translated.
into
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
a movie that is
Right.
even like digestible, or and it's finding that good balance. And I think that's the key to like success in the movie business is balance all around. Don't go all out like with one thing. Try a bunch of stuff. Have a social life still. Have a family like John over here. Don't just be maniacal. You need to have that passion, but balance it out. And I think that will give you the best version of what you were aiming to do, which is like, hey, you signed up for this to make movies and to get paid and make a living making movies, not to just do it in an alley. So have that good balance, and it'll keep you, just on a better playing field of longevity in the industry, which I think is probably the most important thing.
Amen, man. On that note, that's a good way to end it. I appreciate you coming on and talking about the
Thank you, man.
film. Down Below is out October 1st. It should be today. Again, if I get this out on time. And I wish you the best of luck, and I'm sure everyone will enjoy the film.
Thank you, my brother.
Thank you, Spyder. Good to see you, man.